Okay, let's continue this discussion of the two different hemispheres. So, like we said, we have two separate brains in our head that are then connected by the corpus callosum, and they talk to each other that way. Our left hemisphere is going to control the right side of our body, and the right hemisphere is going to control the left side of our body. Okay, so they crisscross what they control. But let's look at specifically what each part of the brain or what each hemisphere of the brain deals with in terms of specific duties. The first is vision. Okay, so in our occipital lobe, our left hemisphere is going to deal with figuring out words and figuring out letters. Okay, so a very logical, basic deciphering what a word is. What is that letter? The right hemisphere is going to be seeing those geometric patterns, recognizing faces, recognizing an emotional expression. Our hearing, which happens in our temporal lobe, remember? So left hemisphere is going to be able to distinguish our language sounds. So being able to distinguish between a long A and a short A sound. Our right hemisphere is going to be those non-language sounds like music, maybe the pitch of someone's voice, whether or not someone's singing or talking. Our memory, which is going to be in our parietal lobe mostly, some in our temporal lobe as well, but our left side is going to be verbal memory, so remembering words, remembering what someone said. And then the right hemisphere is going to be our non-verbal memory. So if you can think of, when a smell brings back a memory or when you're picturing what something looked like, that's non-verbal memory. Our language kind of goes along with vision, but language is going to be on the left hemisphere, our speech, our grammar rules. It's going to allow us to read, write, do arithmetic, which is math. And then on the right hemisphere, it's going to be the emotional tone of speech. So being able to distinguish if someone is being sarcastic or not. And then our right hemisphere is going to deal with a little bit more of spatial ability, which will be geometry, our sense of direction, our distance, the rotation of shapes, etc., etc. The myth is that people are more or stronger in their right hemisphere than their left hemisphere. Their left hemisphere dominant, whatever. That's actually pop psychology. It's completely untrue. We all use all parts of our brain all the time. But some people just have higher skills in geometry than they do in basic arithmetic. So it's just where our skills, our experiences have left us to grow those parts of our brain. Okay, plasticity. So brain plasticity can also be called neuroplasticity. And this is the ability of the brain to change throughout one's life. Basically, it's when you use something, it grows. When you don't use it, you lose it. Okay, so when we're children, plasticity is really strong. Our brain is changing and growing and forming new connections throughout the entire childhood, right? This slows down as we get older. The cool thing about brain plasticity is that if we damage our brain, another part of the brain will actually modify itself in order to compensate for that damage. So there was a story of a little girl who had the left side of her brain completely removed. It's called a hemispherectomy. And because she was very young when this happened, her brain actually modified. That plasticity allowed it to modify so that the right half of her brain picked up the slack and actually helped her regain function of the right side of her body, even though the whole left hemisphere was gone. Split brain procedure, we're going to talk more in depth about this in class, specifically for IB, but we'll get the idea. So a split brain procedure is when the two hemispheres are cut, are severed. They're isolated. We cut the corpus callosum, so right down the middle. So now these two sides of the brain are not speaking to each other. We do this in order to, or it is done, and what we learn from this is that we learn what specific sides of the brain do what. So it's called lateralization of the brain, and it tells us which functions are in which half of the brain. This is usually done in order to fix a specific injury or damage. In this case, it's usually done for severe epilepsy. People can still survive and function normally with this procedure, but it's not done just like because. It's done to help someone. And we can use this to observe and understand what the different sides of the brain, the different hemispheres, do. And so we're going to look at a specific case study or a specific research study that was done about split brain patients. So I'm not going to get too in-depth on here. But we will look at those later on.